Welcome to the Community Living Education Project's Sharing Possibilities for Community Connections learning event. The Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP, is a program through Rutgers School of Public Health. CLEP is committed to providing individual guidance, mentoring, education, and community living resources for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in the state of New Jersey. The CLEP team, many who are family members themselves, can serve as a bridge for families whose loved ones may be seeking residential supports outside of the family's home. Today's webinar, Key Questions when Selecting or Creating a Program for Individuals with Autism, Intellectual Developmental Disabilities, and Challenging Behaviors, is being presented by attorney Lisa Parles, representing Parles Rekem, LLP. To ensure the highest sound quality possible, all attendees will be muted during today's event. To interact with the host or presenter, please use your Q&A option on the bottom of your screen. Topic-specific questions will be addressed at the end of today's presentation as long as time allows. For consideration to all of our attendees, we encourage you to keep questions as general as possible. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenter, Ms. Lisa Parles. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you to the project and to Rutgers for having me talk about this very important topic. I did also want to just say that I don't have a hard stop at 1. I know sometimes the questions and answers do run over a little bit. That's perfectly fine. So we'll stay on a little bit beyond 1, but we'll make sure that we stop before 1 to start the questions at least, so that way people that are participating that have to leave by 1 got a chance to have perhaps their question addressed. Okay, so let me just start by talking a little bit about where the idea for this presentation came from and the format, the topics that we're going to cover. So a couple of years ago was just getting on a plane to actually go visit another program in California, and a client had called and said that they were going the next day to go look at some potential group homes, and that could I give them some ideas of some questions to ask. And their loved one was an individual with significant challenges, particularly challenging behavior. And I said to the client, just about to jump on a plane, but when I get where I'm going, I'll reach out to you. So I began to write questions down, and not even halfway through the flight, I was up to 100. So when I was done, I thought I need to take this and put this more into categories. So when people can approach it, they can approach it more in a systematic way. And also too, I guess I just want to share with you that because I talk a lot about database programs and the need for board certified behavior analysts with this population, who obviously are very data-based, science-oriented. So I have to say that this is not a scientific endeavor in terms of, these are all the things that you need to have success. What it really is just my observation for years of visiting programs around the country. And after a visit, asking myself, when I see a program where this is a program where it looks like the participants are thriving, the staff expresses that they feel supported, and the families are happy with the program, and more importantly, feel like they're actually a part of the program and responsible for helping the program be successful. So when I look at those kind of programs, they tend to have the areas that we're going to talk about. So that's going to be the first half of the presentation. The second half, we're going to turn to, after doing some of these key questions, then we're going to turn to addressing one model in particular, and that's the one that comes up so frequently in terms of parental requests, is the campus-based or farmstead intentional community model. And I have a lot of slides on that I'm going to run through pretty quickly, because in truth, that question of what's allowed has been very confusing, but just want to give you guys some clarity. But you'll see we'll run quickly through those slides, because honestly, that's a whole nother presentation. Then we're going to end with looking at one model that's currently in development and some of the key design components. So that's the matter that we're going to go. So let's start with turning right to our brief intro, which I always like to start with some resources for you. All three of these organizations have to really be given credit for not only beginning, but continuing the fight to make sure that a variety of models are available. So I just, share them with you. National Council on Severe Autism obviously particularly addresses individuals with autism with challenging behaviors. The Coalition for Community Choice and Together for Choice, they have been involved in programs for all different diagnosis, needs, level of severity. I've done a lot of work in the community for individuals with complex medical needs, and we found at a national level that coalition worked really well at getting some federal policy change. So these are all great organizations, all free. I encourage everyone to take a look at them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're gonna jump right into key questions. So as I said, most of the programs that are really effectuating change for individuals that exhibit these maladaptive behaviors are going to have a pretty important role played by a board certified behavior analyst. I think what's really important to remember is that, and I also, when I do this presentation for BCBAs as well, remind them too that the rule is not very discreet in that it doesn't say you can only have X number of cases, right? Instead, it sets up a standard that says your caseload can't impede your ability to deliver quality services, right? So you need to be able to have enough time to do things like assessments and proper training and being able to review not only behaviors, but perhaps replacement skills as well. And that is an ethical requirement within that field. And I think that, board certified behavior analysts, the field has grown tremendously, and the role that they play in programs varies tremendously. I do want to say to the professionals in that field, it is really important for you as both as a field together collectively and individually to make sure that employers and programs are aware that you do have this ethical obligation, because they often will, obviously, because of limited resources, push people's caseloads sometimes beyond what you can do. I always like to give the example that, obviously there's variety between programs, right? So if we look in another field, so say we're looking at the medical field, and you might be looking at a program that would require intensive attention. So let's say an ICU unit in a hospital. So true, if you look at it, you may show that in Johns Hopkins, there's 10 nurses in a unit of such and such size. And in the county hospital, there's only 7 of a similar size. So we know that there's variety. But we also know that in that field, if it gets to the point where there's only 2, that those professionals know what their code of conduct is, and also what the level of care is, that when the professionals start saying, I can't do it, it's too much, and as a field you support each other, I think we see that actually the circumstances for everyone improves. Okay, so now actual questions. Next slide, please. So here's some questions that you should ask when you're looking at a program. Now, using the term board certified behavior analyst, I do want to say that doesn't say that there aren't people without this degree that are extremely talented, have good instincts, and also not to say that people with that degree sometimes are not all that skilled, or maybe don't have experience with this population. Maybe they spent most of their time, with preschoolers, which is a very different approach than when you're looking at addressing perhaps an older student or even an adult. But what I want you to ask specifically, because sometimes programs will use a term like they'll say, oh yes, we have a behaviorist, a behavior specialist. I had one where a parent was told they have a special specialist. So just make sure that, that you don't walk away from a program and go, oh yeah, that's a behavioral program, there's a behavioral approach, and there's a behavioral professional, when there really actually isn't. So you want to ask that. Asking, how many cases the BCBA is responsible for. Again, not a set number, but as the intensity and the complexity of the case gets larger, then obviously you have to reduce the caseload. How many hours per month does the BCBA spend directly observing, either working or teaching the person served? We don't want a program where the BCBA's role is to sit in an office, write a plan and sign plans, or just review data. They've got to, we know that the standard of care requires that they're actually in there, eyes on, and that also that they've worked directly with the person and watch staff either teach or interact with the person. This next one, this probably sounds like a ridiculous question, but believe it or not, I've had parents ask it, and the answer is, oh, we don't actually go in the home when the person is there. We are in the home during the day when they're at day program to review the data or to talk to staff. Obviously, for them to be effective, we want them to be there when the person served is there. Coordination, which is going to be a major theme throughout today. We're going to talk a lot about that, right? Because plans can't be effective if they're not consistent. And you don't always have the same provider in the residence. And you may also have a situation where someone's not yet in a residence, they're still at home and they're either going to a day or a school. We want to make sure that the plan that is being developed and filed is across all settings, because you can't actually measure and tell if a plan is working if you're coming at a situation from a variety of different angles, but also it's also frequently very confusing for the individual as well. Another question, how is information shared with families and how frequently? That's really important. We want to really look at it like, it's just this triangle of person served, families, and the clinicians. And built into the clinicians, I also will include leadership for the program as well. Next slide, please. Okay, assessments. So obviously one of the state of the art when you're looking at behaviors and trying to figure out what the function is, the behavior, not only to help you develop an intervention, but also to look at what is the role of that behavior, what's the function, so you can look at actually teaching some replacement skills. So I have seen, and I've seen this at the school district level as well, reports labeled a functional behavior assessment, but they're not really. They maybe just be based on a more informal assessment or sometimes even just interviews. And then there's, a conclusion at the end, but they have not actually set up in a very systematic data-based way to look at the person's behavior, measuring, antecedents and consequences as well. So make sure it's actually, now this is not something you're getting all the time or, constantly, but when you have a significant behavior that is not diminishing or worse increasing, we want to ask for this. Another question is, how long is it acceptable for a behavior intervention plan to remain unchanged? This is a troubling observation frequently, where someone they had an assessment, they did write a plan, they may even have trained the staff on it, but it's not working. Right. And, remember that these interventions are, they're serious undertakings, right? They do exert control on individuals, on persons served. And we have to be really cognizant of that. If we're going to be intervening in someone's life and affecting their behavior, it has to be for their benefit. And if it just stays in place, even if it's not successful, that's really problematic. And I've seen some really old BIPs. Another question to ask a program is, does the program allow for outside consultants to come in, observe, assess, analyze, make recommendations, and meet with the staff and team? I have to say there's, a real split within programs that we see. Some of them just say no, that they don't allow an outside person, which is, really troubling to me. And then we have other programs that will welcome the outside person. In fact, there's one program that I've dealt with where a family privately paid to have an outside consultant come in. And then on the next case we're involved in, the behavior analyst was talking about, is there any way that we can get that person back? And the next time that person comes, I'm going to have my whole team. So you want to see that spirit of collaboration. Now, in choosing your expert, you have to make sure that that expert also has to understand that, there's some constraints, there's, they are running the program. So of course you want them to be respectful and to also have some good people skills themselves. So the program feels that it is collaboration as opposed to a criticism. If there is an assessment, we want to ask how long is it going to take to do, and is the family going to be provided with a copy of report? You're absolutely should get a copy of report. Like that should not even be a topic of debate, but we've sometimes seen it, and sometimes it's just over confusion that staff is not always aware of what's considered a part of an accessible record. Also, we want to make sure that assessments are used to identify goals, right? So some important tools are things like preference assessments, and also too, obviously, when you're looking at a function of behavior, because we can't just look at a person and think that, well, when there's the behavior, this is how we're going to react to it. That's an important part of it, but we have to also be working at the same time on a replacement skill, right? So if we think, you know what, this is happening because the person perhaps doesn't realize that they can request a break. So they're having a behavior to try to escape the behavior or to communicate to you that I don't want to do this any longer. You know, we want to teach something, even if it's just to teach the use of a break card or, you know, some type of communication system. And even with individuals with that are verbal, that if someone's never given them the opportunity to request a break, they may not, even though they have the language, they may not use their language. So that's really important. And we want to make sure that assessments, as I said, are identifying goals and that they use a variety of assessments. Next slide, please. Tracking progress. So as I said, you want to track both behaviors and skill acquisition, right? And tracking behaviors means actually someone is actually looking at it and analyzing it. The worst thing is when there's just lots and lots of paperwork or lots and lots of forms to fill out. And even in cases where it's actually graphed, but no one's really reviewing it. And we also want to look at, as I said, that part of the program is not just looking at behaviors, but looking at, you know, what the individual is learning. Is the data graphed? Does a clinician review it? And more importantly, is it shared with families? And if there are multiple programs involved, that they're sharing it together. I've had many cases, again, not just in residential programs, but in school programs where, you know, there might be a home team and a school, and you have a behavior happening in one setting and not the other, and no one has shared that information, and an intervention has worked. So communication is key. Again, you want to ask how many skill acquisition programs are run. And when I say skill acquisition programs too, people sometimes when they think ABA, they think, oh, that means sitting in a little chair and getting the person to point to yellow. Though that might be an important, you know, basic skill that would be taught, you know, maybe with an early learner. You know, good programs are going well beyond that. So I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there in terms of that, you know, what an ABA program, what a skill acquisition program looks like. It doesn't have to be in the little chair. It could be out in the real world. It could be at a job site. It could be not something specific related to that, but more that, you know what, we want to teach the person to be able to sit longer and wait in a restaurant and the kind of supports they need. So that could be a skill that you want to work on. So the whole variety of skills, not just those academic based, but they could be life skills, community-based, job skills, okay? One thing to ask is if they ever do IOA data, that's where one person is taking data and another person is observing and taking data alongside them, and then they compare their data, because what that will reveal is that making sure that when everyone is saying someone has done something, it means the same thing for everyone, right? Because maybe someone is scoring a plus that, oh yeah, the person did that, but they had prompted them all the way through. So everyone thinks, oh, he can do that, and he's doing that independently. But if you have, oh, I saw that pop up. I believe it's inter-observer assessment, but hopefully there's a BCBA on that, because I always get that wrong. Someone just asked, what does IOA stand for? So I hope there's a BCBA among us that can tell me specifically, but I think it's inter-observer. Okay, inner observer agreement. Beautiful. That makes sense. So to make sure that when you have two people looking at the same thing, that they're both agreeing that independent is truly independent. What about written progress reports? Again, once again, you're sharing it with the families. How often are they getting it? You certainly don't want that, progress reports are being written and just put in a file. And I've seen that happen in many settings. I've seen that happen, in schools and residential programs and adult day programs. Shift to shift communication. Now, this area is probably, if I really drill down to when there's a problem, when things are not going well, or when families are unhappy, and staff can even be unhappy, and supervisors are unhappy, is that we just don't have a good way to share information. So it's not just about, oh, look, he learned to wait at the restaurant and did well today. It's sometimes things like, the parent had said, the GI said no more orange juice after 12 noon, okay? Or don't give the red gummy bears anymore. Or, last night he didn't sleep, so we're going to probably do something a little bit easier today. That issue of how you share information is the biggest challenge that there is. And I think that, it sometimes does take multiple systems. I'm actually currently working in a pilot project that is funded by the Governor's Council on Autism, a grant that Rowan got. And they are currently looking at not only one particular group home in terms of how everyone communicates with each other, but they're also looking at all the systems that are out there, because there are some really good software programs, but they don't all talk to each other well. So the sort of the purpose of this grant, the first question was, well, what's people's experience now in programs? So they ran a series of focus groups and gathered information, particularly from direct support professionals. And then they've also surveyed, looked at programs, and then are now actually diving into looking at, well, what is available? I think that the next generation of software is going to be ones where things talk more to each other. So it's not just the data system on the behavior, but it's also the note from the healthcare professional, the information that came from the parent, getting that all to talk to each other, I think is really important. So we're working on it, and are excited about some of the things that we're discovering. Next slide, please. Program modeling. So I've already on monitoring talked about letting an independent consultant in. So this is a little bit different. This is not where the parent brings in their consultant, or the parent perhaps brings someone in from another program. So, they bring them in from the school to the group home, or from the home program to the school, or, from day program to the residential program. This is where the program itself brings in an independent consultant. And some of the very best programs do this periodically. They just bring someone in and say, doors open, come take a look. What do you think? How are we doing? And sometimes things that are discovered that even in a very strong program, just having somebody else take a look at it, they'll notice that, hey, this is where the gap is. It's happening in the afternoons, or even noticing that there's a distinction from shift to shift. Another question, are the results shared with the parents? Some programs do that, which I think is really important. Here's another topic, which I know has been proposed legislation for some time on this question of video monitoring being used. I will tell you that my own personal position on this is very, very strong in favor of this. I think what's important, though, is that you can't use the video monitoring as a punishment procedure to tell the staff they did something wrong, or only use it when someone gets hurt, or only use it when an accusation is made. it's important to have it when those things happen, because if someone does get hurt, if you have video monitoring, you can see whether or not there was actually intentional wrongdoing or not, which could be really important, because people could be wrongly accused, or something terrible could be happening and the program is not aware of it. But that can't be the only purpose. You've got to use it. So you're using it as a training tool, that you're making sure that there's integrity, meaning everyone's doing the intervention the same way. I think that in the programs that use it well is where it's used as a support tool for the staff. And I'll tell you, I was actually out in a program in Kansas a couple of years ago where they had very extensive, in fact, they actually had a sort of a command center where the clinicians sat, and they could see within all the different homes, and if there was something going on, that screen would sort of move to the middle of the screen. They could even talk to each other. And I asked staff, because whenever I visit a program, I always try to spend some time with staff as well. And ask them, how do you feel about this? That it's recorded, they can hear you, they're sometimes watching you when you know it or not. And it was interesting because we visited a variety of the homes using that, and even one campus program. And they said they were terrified at first because they thought like, oh, this is Big Brother and it's going to be used to get me in trouble. They said once they saw that it was actually used to help them, that if something went awry, they were able to say, and even in programs being able to, where you could request a review, you could say, hey, you know what, something really just was not right last night, or the behavior came out of nowhere. Can someone take a look at it? Maybe there's something that I just missed there. The person might have been trying to say something or signaling and I didn't pick it up. So it has to be used, in that fashion. It doesn't mean that it's still not difficult. I think this is a big challenge in the field, is that a lot of individuals come from programs where there has not been a lot of supervision. There's not been a lot of training. There's not been a lot of feedback, other than really negative one and egregious cases. It's hard to be a employee in that situation, right? Because it's hard work to begin with. You have to sometimes make on the spot instant decisions. You could do everything perfectly right, and there's still something not go well. So I think that it does take a big commitment to letting the staff know why you do it, and making sure that when you're giving feedback, you're giving it in a positive fashion, to talk about like, what could we possibly do differently? And sometimes in those programs, a new idea grows out of it, where you realize that you're right, that isn't really working. Let's try something different. But we do have to recognize that it's very hard for support professionals, and even people that work as teachers or aides in intensive ABA schools as well. That's often things that are just really hard for them to get used to, that there's someone really on top of them, and that could not just be by video, but just the fact that there's so much on-site supervision. So just we have to be cognizant of that, and be reinforcing to the staff as well. On this issue of restraint, I think that this is a critical tool for that as well. How long it is till the incident is reviewed, because sometimes you have lots and lots of recordings, but nobody is taking a look at it. We want to ask about who contacts the family if a restraint occurs, how long if there was no injury, and also if there's information on an investigation unit or the Human Rights Committee that's shared with the families. Some of these are mandated procedures for the state, but also other ones are that some agencies choose to go beyond that. So I know that there's an incident report within the DDD field that does not get shared with families. And there are some reasons for that. There could be HR reasons, personnel. It's early on in the incident. Perhaps, the information isn't accurate or wrongly accuses someone. But I've seen some good agencies that even though they don't give that document, they create a version of it of their own. So they're making sure that the family knows, what occurred and what they know. Okay, so last question here about how does the program deal with aggression? Well, this there's, obviously, and I'm sure many of people that are actually, on this presentation today, listening today, will tell you that they frequently come across, heartbreaking situations, including one where everyone is doing everything they possibly can and trying as hard as they can. And there's still, behaviors in place, and in some cases, individuals are getting hurt. The peer aggression ones are the one that are the most gut wrenching in my view, because when you think about it, obviously from the person's perspective, if they are the target of the aggression, that, what's their life like if in their home they have to have this, fear, or in some cases unknown. So I think that we have to treat all of these situations with care and address them very quickly, but peer aggression in particular, I think that there are ways to think about it from a design perspective as well. In a perfect world, and I have seen this in some programs, they make sure that they do have available an open unit, at least like a 1-bedroom, because when that's happening, you need to be able, in some circumstances, in some cases, you can push in supports, so that way everyone is safe, and you don't want to remove people from their homes if they're aggressive, because it's heartbreaking for them as well too, because it means that obviously, their life is being affected. They're aggressing probably for reasons that, are sources of distress for them as well. So it's, it's a situation that's failing everyone. But if you have a situation where even with pushing staff in, it can't be resolved, then I think you sometimes need to be able to remove the person. Again, I know this is, most programs will tell you like who has that as a resource, but if you're designing programs, it's something to think about. I have seen it in other programs. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, details on all of this, right? So they'll say, oh yeah, our staff is trained. I know that there is a committee now currently working, that's been driven by parents and done some really wonderful work, and talking about, some real core components that we have to make sure before someone comes in and works with someone that they're actually trained on it. Now, again, some situations might be like we gave them a behavior intervention plan, but there was really never really any hands-on. They haven't been given the whole history of the person. I've seen some programs approach this in a unique fashion. Again, it's resources, which is, I guess, gonna one of the points we'll talk about a little bit later, but I'll raise it here, is that to run a quality program for individuals with these challenging and sometimes dangerous behaviors, it's sort of a paradox in my view, because in one respect, it's not brain surgery in that there's some things we know, like this is really important, right? We need to have plans. We need to monitor. We need to have, database monitoring. We need to have clinicians available to not only train, but to support and be available for questions. We need to make sure that there's a great communication system, so information is getting shared, so someone doesn't get a glass of orange juice when they have reflux. Those are the type of things that parents will often bring so frustrated. So my point being is that on the one hand, we have to recognize that it's not impossible to do this. We can identify core pieces that are going to make it a much better program, but we also have to recognize that it is really hard to do, because it does take a commitment from everyone, and not just a level of training, but a level of commitment to the individual and the person, where you do take the extra few minutes to make sure that you've read the note beforehand. So this issue of just getting the details, as many questions as you can ask. How much time do they spend with them? What kind of information are they getting from the parents? A couple of programs I've seen in a couple other states, which in this pilot program are running now, we have where the parents actually, they record one I saw it was an interview fashion, other was the parents just talking, and the parents just talking about their loved one, giving the history, talking about what the challenges are, but also talking about some things that the person loves or loved. That's really important too, because you want the support people to understand sometimes that this person, there may be something that happened that changed the course that the person was on. And I think it also makes the staff more understanding of perhaps parents that some of their frustration is coming from a point of their heart being broken. So we want to have the parents involved, and I've seen it done in a variety of ways. I like this sort of video thing because then, each staff is always getting, that history. Also, our changes to the behavior intervention plan are critical information shared with everyone. Again, system details. And I've seen some things electronic, I've seen some things paper, I've seen some things just being done, with periodic meetings, but we want to just make sure that it is. I talked a little bit about shift to shift, and then just sort of a tip for if there's any practitioners here, is that you want to make sure that you're also sharing good information and good news as well. Sometimes we do get bogged down on, not that you shouldn't be sharing all the information about, a behavior or a challenge or a problem, but we also do want to periodically share the happy points. And that's not only obviously to offer the parents some joy and happiness, but it's also really reinforcing to the staff, so they can see, gee, look, this was a really nice thing that happened today. So I just want to point that out. And, if they're not doing that, one, professionals, please remember to do that. And families, if it's not happening, then you could ask for that. You could say, gee, could someone let me know? They've been saying he really loves the bowling, but I'd love to hear more about it when, that goes well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so parental engagement. I guess to introduce this topic, when I was saying about how we have this paradox where, like, in the one hand, it's not brain surgery, so there's key components to the end, but on the other hand, it is hard to do because there are a lot of pieces to it. One thing that I want to say to families is that to really, really have excellent programs, and the programs across the country that are really considered like, the Cadillac stellar programs, it's not just state dollars. There are, parents and sometimes even, the staff and the leadership in the program that you have to bring other resources. So whether that's grant writing or fundraising or even just resourcing things like, gee, I have a cousin that owns a furniture company, and help the agency get the discount. Those programs where the families feel, which I see it more frequently in schools that happen, and frequently it's because the schools actually were started by parents. That only happens when agencies are very transparent. So they're sharing information like, gee, that's a great idea, we'd love to do that. But this is where the the challenges are from a financial perspective. So when we're talking about parental engagement, it's a couple different levels. One is, though, how are you connecting families together, right? I have here, I can see my slide is old, via conference call. Those were the old days when we were meeting. That used to drive me crazy, where like the parental meetings were only you had to attend. Let's just set it up where everybody can come. Also opportunities where families can connect with each other. And though I just did stress, fundraising is an important part of this. Again, not just, and not every family can write a check. And I've been involved in programs where families with limited resources were sometimes like the hardest workers, the ones that were willing to, remember, hey, there was someone that I grew up with that did this, and would they help? I know it's hard to do. It's really, really hard to ask for help, and particularly if you're asking for money. But I think the successful programs, there is, the parents very much understand to do it well. We need to bring more resources, and we need to bring it not just so we're paying our direct support professionals what they deserve, but also that we're able to, have the funds to buy extra things like a software program and the like. So that's one issue. But I don't want to suggest that's the only way that you measure parental engagement. Parental engagement, it's important to see that parents are on substantive committees as well. Committees that are going to look at quality and agency goals and strategic plans. That's one thing I often ask programs. They have a human rights committee. Do they have a parent on it? I think that's important. Sometimes looking at like the board. I mean, we're working with a number of families in our practice that actually are in the process of developing projects and even starting agencies. And one of their threshold questions we're saying to look at is that, you know, it's often started by a group of parents coming together, is that you maybe want to write that right into your bylaws that, you know, X percentage of the board is going to be parents. So we just, you know, have them playing a really important role on it. So other ways that they can, you know, interact, and making sure that the board is interacting with families as well. And I want to make one point to parents, though, too, is that it's really important to have a sense and a commitment to that we're all working this together to make it better. Now, I do agree, there are some agencies that the culture works against that in terms of sharing information, having parents involved. But if you're in projects that are open to it, or if you're starting projects, or I have a number of clients that they're in schools that are now looking at thinking about adult services, or adult days that are thinking about developing residential programs, is that the parents also have to remember they play a role in not only, you know, helping develop the program, support the program, but also make the staff feel valued. And, you know, as a parent of, you know, a very disabled, you know, young man, where it's, you know, sometimes heartbreaking to see the injury. I know that your instinct often is to be upset and to think about, you know, oh, you know, what happened? Did someone do something wrong? We have to make sure we have systems so the family's not put in that role, but more importantly, that you just remember reinforcing staff's important. Okay, next slide. Now this piece I'm going to have to run through really, really quick, I think, because we want to leave. So just to summarize, I think you're going to get the theme. Are we welcoming, connecting, informing families? Is the role of clinicians key in the agency, right? You can't just have that, like all the decision makers are the development departments or public relations. Whose HIPAA rights are they? What I mean by that is that sometimes HIPAA is one of the most overused, misused, where people will say like, oh, we can't tell you that because of HIPAA. But you, as your loved one's guardian, you can essentially share information. So I've told families, just write your information on a card and give it to the staff and say, hey, can you give this to the other families? You know, they can say, no, I don't want it, and never connect you, but the precluding that you connect in any way by HIPAA is wrong. Next slide, please. Okay, again, just some more questions to ask, and looking that there's plans and that it's detailed. Next slide. Okay, so I know there were a lot of questions pre-presentation about, like, is this covering under 21, over 21? Really, these concepts, a lot of these concepts cover both under 21, over 21. It could be apply it to a school versus a residential, but we are going to turn now to the issue of some residential models. Okay, so next slide, please. Here's a topic where there's so much confusion, and you'll see I have a bunch of slides we'll probably run through quickly, but I wanted you to have the information, is that because there was, you know, a new change at the federal level, and then states are making decisions. There was a period of time where New Jersey in particular was very restrictive, and some other states as well. And people just don't understand what is allowed. And I do know that, you know, a very frequent model that parents ask for is the intentional community, or, you know, the campus space, or the farmstead, and for a lot of good reasons, right? That there's an economy of scale. There's maybe more activities going on, but generally more supervision. You know, it's easier for a behavior analyst to walk through the campus before they go home than get in their car and drive, home to home. So there is confusion about this. So next slide, please. I just want to get this real clear for you. It grew out of the feds requiring, after the Affordable Care Act, that states showed what they were using their Medicaid funds on, particularly this home and community-based services, which is referred to HCBS. And states had to say what they were doing and what they were going to do, and lots of confusion. Next slide, please. As a result of lots of advocacy at the national level, and here are some, I think, some key organizations. I'm going to point out this A Place in the World in particular. They have a wonderful report that they just issued that not only talk about policy, but they profile specific programs as well, and show you a variety of models. So obviously they're answering the question, which is, anyone should be able to live wherever they want. Why should a person with a disability have less restrictions? Now, I understand there were concerns that, there were periods of time where people were put in large institutions and couldn't even leave to get their hair cut. But don't assume because something is a campus or a cluster or a farm that that's the life that they're living. We can't make assumptions. We have to actually look at what the program is actually doing. Next slide, please. And this is really the most important thing to know, is that currently in New Jersey, they do allow for a number of these models. There's a number of them that have been approved, some that are actually up and running, and some that are in the placement phase. So I do encourage you that if you have an idea for a project, even if you were sometime in the past told it's not allowed, that you do approach the state regarding it. Next slide, please. And when anyone is saying we don't think the feds can do it, I invite you to give them that last quote, which is the head of CMS, which that was under the last administration, but it's been continued under this, which is that there's no federal rule that says you can't use those funds in congregate settings, farmsteads, gated communities, or disability specific. Next slide, please. So here's our program I like to talk. I think we just skipped Benjamin's Hope. So we'll just, if we go back a slide, that's forward. Right, thank you. Love to talk about this program, because this program was actually started by a New Jersey family. That's what drives me a little crazy. I wish they stayed in New Jersey, but they did move to Michigan. They built this program when it was at the height of the federal fight, and in Michigan at the state level, because states can be stricter than the feds allow, and some are. For instance, Pennsylvania is just very, very restrictive. That they went ahead with their dream, and through fundraising, private donations, philanthropic measures, they were able to build this community. I think they serve about 40 individuals, and they did not have approval for HCBS. As a result of both at the national, local, and state level, they did get approval, and they now are receiving funds, and the individuals are funded in this wonderful project. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about a program that's in development. It's Circle Haven is the name of the organization. The website is there. I invite you to go to the website. There's more information there. But also to tell you, this is not the only group out there that is very busy working on building some of these alternative models. This one in particular is, a intentional community, a campus-based program, but for a variety of disabilities, differing functioning levels. So there are some individuals that will be going there only for the affordable housing and not really need support services, and then individuals with significant needs, including challenging behaviors. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share this floor plan with you, because this floor plan, because of the support of the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, this support plan this floor plan grew out of the work of I don't know what to call them, a focus group, a working group, but the council brought together direct support professionals, families, clinicians, builders, providers, and developer, and talked about what are the designs that might best serve individuals. So there's some components that were in here. Was one, line of sight. You can see that, you know, someone walks out of their bedroom, you're going to be able to see that from the living room. It also, one of the units is actually a hidden kitchen. That's a big problem for some individuals. So that, you know, if they, not only individuals with Prader-Willi, but even some individuals that, you know, if someone else is eating, they want to eat, or food stealing or the like. So we designed where that kitchen is really sort of tucked away. So it's not just a trigger for someone. And very large bathrooms with accessible bathtubs, which are really important, not only for seizure situations, but for behaviors. If someone has a behavior in a bathtub, you want staff to be able to safely, you know, get to them to intervene and keep the person safe as well. Also a shared space. You see there's staff in the middle. So that way you can keep your manager or your, you know, your clinician and share it. So these attached units, we've seen in a lot of programs. So that's just one idea that is out there now. Next slide, please. This is another model, which originally was developed, the idea for the individuals that would be living independently. So they didn't really have staff needs, but they did want some, oh wait, is this the 2+2? This is actually the not correct one. I'll tell you about that, okay? It's actually the quad, which is essentially individual apartments, 4 individual apartments, but they all open up onto a shared space. So originally that was developed, and with the architect that we work with, he's actually built something like that on another program. And we originally thought, well, this will be great for the people that can really live independently, but maybe they need some help or, you know, supervision, or even just a social opportunity. So it's this slide that we're seeing 2+2 doesn't really apply. So we might as well go to the next slide. I'm happy to get that other slide out to people that do show the quad. But, you know, since developing that, we've been talking to so many parents that have individuals with high need, and so many of them are preferring that quad and thinking, you know, there's so many times where one behavior sets off the other behavior, or someone didn't sleep well, so they woke the other person. So we're now looking at using that quad model for individuals with higher needs as well too. Now, again, it's going to come down to, you know, going to really dig into the weeds on the in terms of the staffing, and you've got to have the sufficient budget, and you're going to have to probably, you know, have additional, you know, supports to support the program for it. But it really has, you know, made me think differently as we've spoken to more and more parents that might actually work better for someone with high needs as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we missed the campus one, so we'll go back one more. So that's just that overall look. This is, in this one particular Circle Haven project, this was a core component, but we've seen it many, many places. And what's really important is that you see sort of that center area. In many ways, that can provide for even more independence, because it doesn't really show it, but the houses are connected by a fence where maybe someone can sit on the porch. There's like porches that open onto the central area. Someone could sit on the porch and watch someone and let someone step away and engage in an activity, as opposed to, if you were out in a public park and the like, where people have to, really stay on top of them because of safety concerns. Now, I do want to mention, though, too, what's important and why we need to build like hundreds of these is we do not want to take these projects and fill them with only people with significant needs. Okay, it has been done before, and it generally fails because it becomes an unstable environment, and you increase the likelihood that there will be a problem every day in every house. So you do need to mix your population, and given this number of people that need these kind of settings, we have to build a lot of them because they need to be big enough. They need to have that mixed population. So again, there can be days that if you're doing a shared concert, maybe there's not a behavior that day. But if you put 20, 30, 40 people with high need in, then people are probably often seeing other behaviors. So we do need to, as I said, build lots of these. Now, why is this frequently, I'd say it's the most frequent requested model? I think because not just from families, but providers as well. And I did a lot of work at the federal level when we were successful in changing the Medicaid rules where they do allow these. Again, you have to show that your program is going to allow choices. If you can't make the person stay there and have the day program there. If someone wants to go to the campus and work off of the campus, even if it's a farm community, someone says, hey, I don't want to work on the farm. So you need to offer choice. You need to do access to the community. You need to always be working on skills so people can go out to a restaurant. Everything should not happen on this campus. But if an individual needs it for safety, it's helpful. But even the individuals that don't need it for safety, one of the things that we've talked about at Circle Haven a lot is the farming component. And one of our board members is the owner of Bobolink Farms. So has done a lot of the design work on the greenhouses and the gardens, that everyone forgets that, they hear like, oh, greenhouse farm, they're like, oh, it's an institution, people will be stuck there all day. No one's suggesting that that's what you do all day long. You can still get up and go work somewhere else. My son volunteers in a food bank, he will continue with that. But there's a lot of hours after the day, and from Friday to Sunday. How great would it be to have an activity there available that the community comes together and collectively does? If you look at national design for typical populations, there's more and more architects, there's more and more towns that are looking at planning like this for people without disabilities. So that's important to know. And what do you get from it? You can, share staff, supervision is generally better. There's lots of reasons for it. Boy, I promised I was going to leave time so people wouldn't have to jump off at one. So I'm going to stop. So there's some time to get to the questions. And if you can stay on, I please offer to stay on longer. Sorry about that, Melanie. I should have said a time.
No, all really important information for you to share. So it's perfect timing. Lisa, can you talk a little bit, if someone wanted to get in, if someone's interested in getting involved in the Circle Haven project, how would someone go about doing that?
Okay. So it's still in the planning stage. In fact, though we've done a lot of work with respect to, approvals and design and the like, we have not yet settled on a particular property. We're looking at a couple of them, but it is going to be in South Jersey near Rowan University, since we were already working with Rowan on that technology grant and a couple other projects. So it's a little premature in terms of like for us to be looking at participants. And if you go on our website, you'll see you can get on the mailing list, but the actually having, selecting the participants is definitely going to be a clinical decision made by the executive director and the clinician. But please feel free to get on our mailing list. We're sharing information, and there will come a time where we are looking for participants. And I know that their Bobolink Farms is going to be doing an event in June where we're going to be sharing more information about, some of the piece components of the project. I also too want to tell you, like, we're not the only one. There are a number of groups out there. I have a group I'm working with in my practice now. The kids are only like 10 and 11 years old, and the parents have come together. I mean, those are really amazing parents that they've already been thinking, gee, there's more years post 21 than before 21, but there are. And there's even some, projects that are already, like, for instance, Bergen County United Way's Forum Park is a large development with, some 24/7, some independent living. And I think there's like 80 units there and a community center. So there are more and more of them are coming online.
Beautiful. So we have a family member who's inquiring. They have a 28-year-old son who has high needs. He just got the CCP budget this year. He is nonverbal. He has challenging behaviors. The family wants to know, do they lose their budget if they go to another state?
Okay, so if, you know, that issue about placement out of state is, you know, an awful topic in New Jersey, because we used to send all the time out of state without a problem. And then that horrible return home New Jersey plucked people out of state that were there for decades. So right now, currently for adults, for children, you can go out of state. And in fact, I have many kids that go out of state on a school district contract as well, too. So don't forget that. But for over 21, for permanent placements, currently now, New Jersey does not fund out-of-state placements unless you were already placed at the time when we passed the law, which basically eliminated return home New Jersey. So for the individual to go out of state, New Jersey will not fund it. If the question is, can the parent move out of state? The answer is yes. Once the person is placed, the guardian does not have to stay within state. They can move elsewhere.
Perfect. The family moves out of state and the individual goes with them.
Well, the
New Jersey budget would not follow.
Will not follow. And you know, I have had some families that were in under 21 school district placements in other states that actually looked into, and my advice always is find my counterpart in that state that's going to advise you on what the process where families have actually, you know, moved at adult services time for the person to be able to stay in that state. But that state's going to fund, and do not do the move until you've talked to the program, you got a spot, and you've gotten some advice on how to do it, because every state has different rules on how you get that residential budget. Wonderful. And it doesn't travel with you. Not only does the money not travel, the waiver doesn't travel, your waiver status. So you don't just go to another state and go, oh, hello, Connecticut, I'm here. I had the CCP. Now you give me the CCP too. You have to go through the Connecticut process.
Lisa, can you talk a bit more about parent involvement? If an individual is currently residing through an agency, can you talk a little bit if there's not already a parent group organized within that agency, how a family members may be able to go about setting something up?
Right. Well, you the Caminos law that was, you know, passed does require that information is shared with parents. So on intake, you should be filling out a form where you give consent that can be shared, and that there are periodic opportunities for families to get together. Obviously, COVID's thrown a bit of a wrench in that. But I think if you even start with just putting your information on an index card and giving it to the group home manager and going, can you please give this to the other residents in the program, and start talking. I've seen it sometimes just happen with two parents. And, you know, they just wanted there to be a swing set, you know, and we're able to, you know, again, sometimes it is a resources project, and it often turns into, you know, maybe we're going to do a wrapping paper sale to get that swing set, the funds for the swing set. But I think that asking them to connect is really sort of the first step. And you should be approaching the agency as well, because, you know, there are some agencies that do support this. And, you know, what's interesting too, is that I've actually had parents, agencies say to me, and some other parents as well too, that like, oh, well, we don't like to do that to parents, like to ask more of them, their life is so hard or whatever. And, you know, before my son went into residential, he was in ABA school, as an Alpine Learning Group. And when we first, you know, went to residential, it felt like such a big part of my life had dropped out, because that school was started by a family and expanded by a family. And it was all, and we had probably, you know, not 100%, but maybe 70% participation on everything. And I miss that. Like, to me, that empowered me. You know, that was like, I maybe can't safely keep my child home, but I can help make his program better. And so it's not going to be for every parent. Some parents have circumstances, and quite frankly, the toll that's been taken on their own financial situation and personal life, there might be a period of time you can't do any of this. But if you're an agency that's listening, don't assume that parents don't want to be asked to be involved, but also don't ask them just to be involved in fundraisers. Ask them to sit on your human rights committee or a study committee. Like at Alpine, we did a whole, you know, sort of think tank on how to start adult services and families. There was a lot of transparency at that agency where they told you, like, this is what it's going to take, this is what we need, let's think about, you know, what kind of business we could start, you know, to support it. And the other thing too is that another piece of advice I would give to parents, and this is a hard one to do too, is that we sometimes don't ask people that love us to help us. And part of it is because it's too hard sometimes to get help, you know, like, no, I don't want you to come over and babysit. Trust me, it's a nightmare. All right. But you could drop a lasagna off. I may ask you to leave it at the front door because we have something going on here. So I do want to say that to parents too, and that for organizations that we're helping that are creating organizations, that's one piece of advice we're giving them is like early on, start committees, okay? And bring people on. You have a sister that's always like, I wish I could do more. Tell like, hey, would you be willing to sit on this committee to help with that? You would be surprised how many people that start on committees, learn about an agency, and suddenly become big supporters or even join a board. But you have to ask. And sometimes we just don't because we think, like, the things we need help with, you know, obviously I'd love to ask someone for a nice big check to pay for the gas to get my son places he needs to go. That's hard to do, but maybe there's other things. And, you know, I had a parent tell me that they had a neighbor that came over every year at holidays and said, I know this is hard, please let me help. And she would say, there's nothing you could do, you know. And then one year she just thought, you know what? Would you mind wrapping my presents? And now every year going forward, the neighbor comes, picks the presents up, wraps them all, and drops them off. So we have to sometimes ask because no one can say yes if we don't ask.
Absolutely. So we do have someone sharing that, let's see. I'm sorry, we have new questions coming in, so everything sort of scrolls up. We do have someone sharing that their loved one was in three different programs and no information was shared with the families. So again, right, that's why we do sessions such as this. So if you were not given the information of other families' contacts, for example, that's something that you now know that you can request, right? Give permission for your contact to also be shared, reach out, reference.
Right, ask your support coordinator to ask
for
the
assistance.
support.
Absolutely. So again, it's information sessions like this that allows us to gain the knowledge to move forward with better information behind us. Let's see. Does that also apply for sharing parental or guardian contacts? Does that also apply for day programs? Do you know?
You know what? I'm not sure, actually. I'd have to get back to you. I think it does, but let me check. I do believe that it does apply, but I'll have to take a look at it and answer. I'll get back to you guys on that.
Great. Lisa, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years, specifically about centered approaches, you know, quality of life. We do have someone who is just asking for some clarity of how did these settings, such as Circle Haven, differ from locations that segregate individuals with IDD? It says, we hear about community inclusion, and as lovely as these settings seem to be, there seems to be some disconnect from the community. Just looking for some clarification, not denying that the system is an improvement from state facilities. Can you provide a little bit more information?
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, that's why we need a variety of models, right? Because one size does not fit all, and this may not be what you would choose for your loved one or the individual would choose. Some people, their dream is to live in their own apartment and maybe in the hometown where they, you know, grew up, and work in the McDonald's that they went to all the time. So that's the first thing. Choice is paramount. We want individuals with disabilities to have the same choices that we do. We allow typically developing people to live in intentional communities. I live in an over 55 community. No one said I couldn't do it. Lots of senior housing projects. There's now even some architects are developing like interest communities, like people that are really, into, farm to table. So everyone that moves into that community makes a commitment to a community garden. Don't assume that if you have a community, that people are locked into that community. Okay, it's individual goals driven by the person's needs and choices. And you could have people that live, I'll give you the example, Center for Discovery, which is a wonderful New York State large program. They have so many different choices. People may start on the campus, but then they could start to work in the town of Hurley, or eventually move to a group home or an apartment. We need a variety of settings throughout all the states, but within the programs as well. But, I think it has to be driven by the person's needs. And if you can, build in choice for the person. But the thing that people, again, until your kid's been in residential, I guess there's sort of 2 points I want to make. One is that putting a group home in a community does not mean you have community inclusion. How many people go from the group home to the van to the day program? And now in COVID, they go from the group home to the group home to the group home, right? Okay, so just plopping a house down in the community does not mean that anyone is having an inclusive experience at all. Also, just having someone have their home in an intentional community doesn't mean they're not out in the community. Many of the programs that I have visited, there's so much community interaction. There's a program in Monmouth County, Oasis, that they're not only out in the community at farmers markets and all these wonderful things, they're reverse inclusion, which, by the way, CMS now does recognize as valid inclusion experience, that they run a breakfast and a luncheon that is like fabulous. And sometimes they're sold out. Like, you can't even get a ticket to it. They have, I know, volunteer lists for members of the community come and help with the farm work. I remember talking to the director once, again, pre-COVID, so, maybe things are a little more challenging, but they actually said that they had a wait list for volunteers. Like, people wanted to come and help. Now, maybe it helps that they had a lot of baby goats who are adorable too. So people want to do that. I know they did a fundraiser doing goat yoga, which was a big success. In case people don't know, that's where you do yoga and the goats jump on your back. Go watch a video, it'll make you laugh hysterically. But don't assume because there's that structure that no one is coming or going. And the good ones, Misericordia in Chicago, which is a huge campus, they have this whole program connected with Ireland where like volunteers come for a year at a time. I mean, there is frequently interaction. And if a good program is going to give you that choice, you could be living, at a Circle Haven program where there's a greenhouse and then you just, I don't like the garden, I don't like the greenhouse, I want to go work at McDonald's. And, maybe on Saturday night, I might want to go to movie night, but I don't. I want to go in the regular theater and watch it. Then that person is given that choice. Big is not always bad. Small is not always good. Campus is not always quality. Group home is not always inclusion. You have to look at the person's experience. And that was when we were fighting this at a federal level, which we're so proud that we were able to move the needle and then move it again in so many states, including New Jersey, was that saying, stop looking at you're coming in from a normative perspective. You're like, oh, inclusion is good. And this is how you get inclusion, an apartment in a big apartment complex. Well, you know what? What about other measures? How often is the person having injuries? How often are people going to the hospital? How often are they ill? Are they able to safely get to places? Let's put some other measures in that look at quality as opposed to looking at the structure itself. Now, I'm a firm believer, having been to, my God, I don't even know how many states at this point. I've seen over 100 programs, that there are some things inherently beneficial to these clusters because, it's just the on-site supervision, being able to share staff, that like, there's a lot of people, my son in particular, low frequency, high intensity, right? really hard to program for, because there's lots of times where you don't need a lot of staff and help, but when you do, boy, do you need it. So it makes a lot more sense to put them together in a cluster and have a response team. I like the idea of the pushing services in and out and not pulling people in and out.
Beautiful. I think the thing that stood out to me was really the model, the floor plan that you shared. To me is what really seemed different than what many people think as traditional congregate living. The floor plan just seemed like everyone had their own space, right? People had an opportunity to go into that common area if they're choosing to do so. And individual supports really seem to be addressed.
Yeah, Melanie, I definitely will have to share with you the floor plan for the quad too, which I'm sorry I didn't get up there.
That's okay. We can definitely share that in the future.
Sure.
So, and again, I think, right, one of your opening slides stated, this is not a one size fits all approach, right? We, as adults, know what works for us, right? Whether we're living in a single house, whether we're living in an apartment, who we're choosing to, have as a housemate. I know my daughter lives in an apartment right now, right? She chose to have a housemate with her. And I think a lot of this, there are a lot of options within the state of New Jersey, but making sure that there are options for all is what's so important also. And this is adding another option to that list, which may be able to serve people in a lot more of a person-centered way than, what traditional models would have.
And one thing too that happened is that when there was an issue over, and we saw this in a lot of states about don't make the individual units too big, which I definitely agree with, that though they allowed for bigger units for individuals with high needs. And to me, it was like, we're going in the wrong direction. Okay, we're building 6-person quote unquote behavioral homes. I remember years ago walking through a couple houses with Dr. Peter Gerhardt and asking him, like, well, what do you think is the optimum number? And he's like, the more people you have, the more likelihood is that everyone's going to have a bad day. Okay, so I think that what we're starting to see in other projects is move towards connected but individual units, including your own kitchen and living room, with sort of the center space. Even having apartments, but maybe with a door in between. So again, staff can, flow, because there's things that you have to really look at in terms of being able to, how you get staff where they need to be. But to me, like, we're just going, and a lot of agencies will do that. They'll say, oh, you have a high need person. We have this behavioral house over here. And it has more staff, and the behavior analyst calls more frequently. I know it's a challenge and it's going to be hard to do, but I think we need to be building more of these large mixed projects, so you're not having all intensive needs together. Now, you do have to be sensitive to the fact that, it is for everyone stressful to see someone in distress, right? So someone that has significant behaviors, be careful what quad you put them in, because you don't want the other people in the quad to have anxiety about coming home too. So it takes a lot of care in terms of how you match participants. But I think a good project, which this one does, Kitchen Associates is our architect, and Steve, the architect, is fabulous, has a disabled child and lots of insight from other projects. But one thing early on, which he talked about, is you want to have 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. You want to have a 2 attached to 2, 1's attached to 1's. Just a lot of different options, because you need to also, once you get in there, you don't know that. I'm sure that we're going to discover. I mean, this point about the quads, that has been so interesting to me, because I, every time I meet a family with a high need person, I always ask them, like, what do you think? Would you rather have them in this and that? So many of them are like, I like that quad idea because my son doesn't sleep. And if he wakes everybody else up in his group home, it's a disaster for everyone. Or, or he wants to sleep late and there's just a noise in the kitchen. Again, it's a little bit of a challenge in terms of how you're going to work that staff. I think it's, it's going to take a lot of support in order to do these programs really well. But it's just been really, really interesting to me that so many families have said that. And if you do, again, just matching the people in terms of, you don't want to have someone that noise bothers them being with a noisy person. So it takes a lot of care.
I can imagine. Lisa, so we have a lot of people, even people from out of state, and they're asking, is there one collective list? Is there one site that people go to share a list of intentional communities that you know of?
So I'll give you one that was on the very starting slide, both Together for Choice and the Coalition for Community Choice are excellent resources. Actually, I think she signed up, but I saw Desiree Kamika was on here early. She is just fabulous. I actually should have stopped to thank her because honestly, we would not have the flexible statewide transition plan without Desiree. In the early days, she was such a great resource in terms of telling us, the law, reading our plan. She even actually came to Rutgers early on when the first SDP came out and we did a presentation there. That's her group, the Coalition for Community Choice. That has a housing piece of it where it's an amazing tool. You can see other projects, you can connect with other projects as well. Together for Choice, they have a lot of, you can be family members, but they also, if you join as an organization, they do like profiles. So they'll like on occasion, like we're gonna profile Misericordia and everyone get on and Misericordia presents what they're doing, how they're doing it. It's a nice resource. And then a little bit later, there was the slide with, which I'm actually gonna ask you to forward till we hit it because the name is escaping me right now. This program, no, I think it might have been, no, I keep going, you're right. It's actually when I'm talking about what kind of choices you should have. And there's a couple of quotes in it. Next, it's the next one. Nope. Right, next one. Okay, placeintheworld.org. That they just did a fabulous report for programs all over the country where they're profiling, a number of models. So I think those resources are, really good place to start. National Council on Severe Autism too, on occasion, will share information on a project.
Great. Perfect. And again, there are a lot of attendees here from different states. So not everything is going to be New Jersey related necessarily on those sites, but the information is going to be really valuable. And I believe that Desiree is still on. So I'm sure that she's
all right.
Wonderful comment. So before we sign off, Lisa.
Well, anybody from New Jersey right now, we should all take a moment to applaud her.
There you go. And Lisa, before we sign off, can you just give 3 quick tips that you've found to be beneficial, right? Something, again, quite often we speak about how to boost the morale within the residents, for the staff. 3 quick tips that you would suggest families being able, how they could contribute or recognize the team members within the home.
Well, obviously now it's even more important because of the severe staffing crisis is that, and we've done a good thing in that we're increasing obviously funds to pay people, more, even, the minimum wage going up is going to be helpful. But it's interesting because there's been a couple studies that looked at when people leave the field and they don't always leave the field over money. Okay, it's frequent. They'll say, I love my job, I'm heartbroken, but I have to go to this other job. But sometimes they will say they didn't get the support that they needed. So that's really important to help advocate, for the staff. If the staff is like, I have questions. So calling a team meeting and asking, hey, could the staff be there? So they would have an opportunity to say, this is working, this isn't working. I think that's one important thing, so they feel supported. Another thing too is that think about how hard their job is. So if you can eliminate And again, we all have busy, challenging lives. Some of our lives are hollowed out from the whole, IDD experience or our crisis. So it's not always doable. But I think that, once in a while saying, hey, Sunday night, I'm going to bring dinner made to you, because that's one less thing that they have to do. And maybe they're have a little more time to sit on the couch and read to your loved one. So I think that, and the other thing is that I've seen at a lot of programs, this is point 3, you asked me for 3, is that some organizations that make sure that the parents are very much involved in direct support professional week, appreciation week. And one program I knew, that parents all came in and they did, a breakfast for like every day for 7 days. So they hit all the different, staff members for that, or even have done where this is one where I saw families where, again, went to the people like, what can I do? What can I help with? Well, you know what? You own a shoe store. Give me a gift card or whatever, and doing like a raffle for them. So one thing I love too about Center for Discovery in New York is that anything they do educational wise, like when they're teaching about like healthy diets, they offer that to the staff. The staff actually it goes home with fresh produce from the program. So when you're doing enrichment programs, think about doing it for the staff too, as well.
Right. So thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure to have you share your expertise, your experience through life with your family. It's always appreciated, and we're grateful for your
time. I want everyone to feel encouraged. Okay, it can be overwhelming because if you're starting from scratch, there's a million steps here, absolutely. But the feds move the needle. They're giving us choice. Some states are really excellent in terms of allowing things, and that we have families that started schools that are now turning their attention to the post 21, which is more years than before 21, and things are brewing. I am hopeful. I think the landscape is going to look very different in 10 years. Last thing I want to mention too is that in New Jersey, in terms of public dollars for building, it's actually a really good time because we have a lot of money still in, municipal housing trust funds that our Council for Affordable Housing, under the last administration, didn't even meet for years, and the money just kept accumulating. And towns that have not met their affordable housing obligation are under pressure to do things. And some towns are very interested in doing this. Maybe they'll donate the land, maybe they'll make the zoning process easier for you, and in some cases even make a contribution towards the building. And that's as a result of a New Jersey court decision a couple of years ago. So it's a good time. We should go out and create, but also don't give up on improving too. I have seen that happen, where I had it in one case where the agency said, oh, we would never ask that of the parents. That's like terrible. That would be horrible. Their lives are so hard, blah, blah. It's like, no, offer it to them. They may want to sit on your human rights committee and feel more connected. And, I remember one dad telling me at a golf outing, this was another agency, we went to it, and he said, this is like my greatest source of joy. It always broke my heart that I just couldn't help my son. And this I know how to do. So not everyone's going to say yes, but offer them the opportunity to be engaged.
Wonderful. So the Community Living Education Project, just like today's session, is focused on offering presentations to really meet the needs of the community. You're going to see a really brief survey pop up on your screen at the end of today's session. We encourage you to take the 30 seconds that you may need to complete that post survey. It's information that you provide us that allows us to plan for future sessions to better meet your needs. Again, on behalf of CLEP, the Community Living Education Project, Lisa, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for attending today's session. We will be sending out a flyer for January and February upcoming information sessions, and we hope you can join us then.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Take care.
Go get them, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Be well.